I've always believed that my life was modest. I never spent money carelessly or extravagantly. However, one day I sat down and looked more closely at how my money was being spent, and I was genuinely shocked by what I discovered. I was overspending on little habits that had subtly accumulated over time rather than on large purchases. As seniors, we frequently assume that since we don't live extravagantly, we must be frugal with our money. In actuality, though, a lot of us have ingrained habits, ignore ongoing costs, and undervalue the influence of emotional spending. This has nothing to do with assigning responsibility. Without awareness, our savings gradually vanish, one insignificant expense at a time. One is clinging to previous spending patterns from one's professional life. I told myself I was ready when I retired. I had prepared, saved, and accepted that I would have to live on less. I assumed I would adjust on my own since I no longer received a paycheck every 2 weeks. However, I was unaware that my deeply rooted routines and spending habits from my working years did not accompany me into retirement. I became accustomed to certain amenities when I was still employed. Lunch with coworkers, a trip at the grocery on the way home to pick up something, and morning coffee from the corner store were all justified in my mind. I put in a lot of effort. The money was there to sustain that comfort, which I had earned. However, an odd incident occurred after retirement. I continued to spend in the same manner. The habits persisted despite the shift in income. Even so, I went out to lunch. I continued to purchase items that I didn't really need. I continued to reach for my wallet with the same ease, oblivious to the fact that every dollar I spent was no longer reimbursed by a paycheck. I initially convinced myself that it was harmless, just a few bucks here and there. However, as the months passed, I started to observe something. My savings were getting smaller. I was living as though I was still working, not because of major expenditures or exigencies. I hadn't changed my mind. My way of life had not been adjusted to reflect my new circumstances. It was difficult to accept this realization. I felt a little silly about it. However, I also perceived it as an epiphany. I began keeping track of all of my expenses, even the small ones. I started brewing my own coffee every morning. Instead of going out to dine, I cooked modest meals at home. I allowed myself to slow down in both life and expenditure. In actuality, retirement calls for more than just budgeting. It necessitates altering habits. The very freedom we have worked so hard to achieve will be subtly undermined if we do not give up our working life spending habits. 2. Undervaluing the price of minor daily indulgences. The little things are easy to overlook. A $2 mobile game, a magazine at the grocery store checkout, and a cup of coffee from the nearby cafe. They don't feel like significant choices. They are modest rewards, slight pleasures, and comforts. However, I discovered, sometimes the hard way, that a retirement budget is not depleted by large expenses. It's the little ones that are frequently and unnoticedly repeated. I ignored these kinds of purchases for years. I thought I was thrifty. I never took extravagant vacations or purchased upscale goods. However, I continued to question why my savings did not go as far as I had anticipated. I made the decision to total my expenses over the previous 30 days one afternoon. The small extras, not the groceries or bills. I was shocked by what I saw. Even though it was a light month, it was more than $200. Neither home repairs nor emergencies were funded with that money. It was spent on items I hardly recalled purchasing. I became aware that I had been overspending. These weren't deliberate choices, they were only routines. A few bucks a day spread by several weeks and months adds up to thousands of dollars annually. I could have saved that money to feel more secure or utilized it for something worthwhile. Small joys are perfectly acceptable. Retirement shouldn't be a time of deprivation. But awareness was what I needed. So I started doing something easy. It made a huge difference for me to ask myself, do I really want this, or is this just a habit? Before making any tiny purchases. I still occasionally purchase coffee. I occasionally skip it in favor of the peace and quiet of preparing it at home. The difference now is that I don't go about the day with my wallet half open. Instead, I make a decision. Retirement independence is more than just having more time. It involves making deliberate purchases, even for the tiniest items. Third, the attitude that you deserve it. This was one of the most alluring ideas that appeared in my head when I retired. I'm worthy of it. I felt like I had earned the right to have fun after all those years of working hard, having a family, paying off a home, and showing up every day, and I had. However, I was unaware of how easily that conviction may lead to excessive spending. It began innocently. A better set of kitchen knives, a new living room recliner, and a weekend excursion that ended up lasting 5 days. Every choice made sense at the time. Why not? I asked myself. I'm currently retired. It's my time now. And that was accurate in a lot of ways. However, I didn't stop to consider how much it was costing me or how frequently I was repeating it. I wasn't living extravagantly, at least not in terms of appearance, but I was going over my retirement budget. And I was using a feeling to justify it. I'm worthy of it. In actuality, that statement can be harmful if it is not counterbalanced with introspection, since each time I convinced myself I deserved something, I was sacrificing long-term stability for immediate gratification. I eventually started to feel the pressure. The savings were not where they ought to have been. The credit card balance appeared to be higher than normal. Instead of feeling less nervous, I felt more. I realized I deserved peace of mind at that point, so I had to stand back and ask myself, what do I really deserve? I was worthy of stability. I should not have to worry about money when I woke up, and that entailed changing my definition of reward rather than creating new things. I started to appreciate peaceful mornings, being well, and having the freedom to live simply. You truly deserve to enjoy your retirement, but spending doesn't always bring happiness. Appreciating what you already have can sometimes help you find it. I started spending less and felt richer than ever after realizing that. 4. Sentimental spending associated with sentimentality and recollections. When it comes to money, nobody can tell you how powerful memory can be. It goes slowly for me. In a store, I might come across a piece of furniture that resembled my parents or something that brought back memories of my early years. An old movie on sale, a recipe, a tune, or a special smell. Something deep inside of me was pulled by these objects. They provided solace, familiarity, and a link to a period of time or a person I was missing. So I purchased them. It seemed harmless at first, a few bucks here and there to relive the experience. But as time went on, I became aware of something odd. Things with sentimental significance but little practical utility were piling up in my house. I wasn't gathering items. It was costing me more than money since I was gathering feelings and attempting to cling to past moments. It made my house more cluttered and made my emotions heavier, because nothing could really bring back what I was yearning for, no matter how familiar. Instead of living in the present, I had been spending money in an effort to re-establish a connection with the past. Understanding this pattern took some time. I still think it's important to honor memory. However, I had to come up with fresh methods. I started penning letters to family and friends. I began telling my grandchildren stories. Rather than purchasing additional mementos, I framed a few cherished pictures. By doing this, I felt more connected to my past without allowing it to dictate how much I spent. Spending on emotions is subtle. It can subtly take you away from financial equilibrium, but it seems cozy rather than risky. I now stop when I experience that surge of nostalgia. Do I want this object, or am I missing something more profound? Everything was altered by that inquiry. 5. Overpaying for upkeep of the house out of pride. My house used to feel like a representation of all I had strived for. It was more than a structure. It contained significance, milestones, and memories. There, I brought up my kids. I commemorated holidays, birthdays, and private times that no one else ever witnessed. I therefore gave that house everything I had when I retired, and the kids had long ago moved out. But there was a price for clinging on. A leaky tap and a damaged light fixture were the first minor fixes. The yard needed maintenance. The gutters needed to be cleaned. The roof, the water heater, the heating system, and the taxes continued to rise. Another issue arose each year, and I continued to fix the house because I was proud of it. I told myself it was worthwhile as I continued to pump money into it. Perhaps it was. However, I was unaware at the time that my pride in keeping up the house was subtly depleting my savings. I wasn't spending because I wanted to brag. I was spending because I believed that letting go of the house would entail letting go of my history. It would be like giving up, but eventually I had to ask myself some difficult questions. Was I serving the space, or was it still serving me? Did I reside in the house, or was my life being controlled by my house? The responses were honest but challenging. I started thinking about other possibilities. I wanted to simplify rather than downsize. Lower taxes, less upkeep, and less stress were all benefits of a smaller location. It meant having more flexibility to concentrate on what was important now rather than what was important years ago. Although it was difficult, letting go of the house provided me financial, emotional, and physical breathing room. I came to see that neither square footage nor property value define a house. Peace is what defines it. And I felt more at home than I had in years when I eventually moved into a simpler, smaller space. 6. Overlooking sporadic and seasonal costs. I used to believe that I was quite in control of my spending. I budgeted my groceries, paid my payments each month, and didn't buy anything ostentatious. Occasionally, though, something would confuse me. An unexpected medical bill, a large car repair, or a holiday gift spree. I would be taken aback, as if it had appeared out of nowhere. In actuality, it did not appear out of nowhere. I simply hadn't planned for it. The cadence of retirement is different. Some months are light and easy, while others are difficult due to forgotten facts rather than bad choices. Birthdays, property taxes, yearly insurance premiums, family vacations, and even winter heating expenditures are examples. They fall between the cracks since they don't appear every month. I used to become irritated. I am cautious, I thought. I don't go over budget. Why does it still feel constricted after a few months? Then I understood that my overall spending was not the issue. It was how unevenly things were occurring. I hadn't taken timing into consideration. I therefore began doing something straightforward but effective. I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down every expense I could think of that only occurred once or twice a year. I then treated those expenses like monthly bills and spread them out over a 12-month period. For those sporadic times, I set up a tiny reserve fund. It only required a change of perspective, not a degree in finance. Since then, not a single yearly expense has caught me off guard. I have the money ready for the holiday season. I'm prepared when the car requires new tires. I feel more confident and at ease because of that preparation. I don't think I'm constantly catching up. I feel like I've made progress. We are not overwhelmed by the quantity. It's the unexpected. Additionally, we feel more comfortable in retirement if we tolerate fewer surprises. 7. Giving more money to people than we can afford. We cherish our families. That much is for sure. Additionally, we frequently wish to be giving as parents, grandparents, siblings, or friends, particularly in retirement. After all, we want to help the individuals we care about now that we have more time. However, when we say yes when we can't really afford it, that love can occasionally transform into silent financial hardship. I recall the first time I gave a loan to one of my kids. Saying yes felt nice. I wanted to demonstrate that I still had value to offer. Then followed another request for a few $100s here and there, a little rent assistance, or a donation to college books. It was often, but it was never very large. And I never declined. I was initially unaware of the effect, but eventually it became apparent. My emergency savings decreased. The amount on my credit card increased. Above all, I started to feel nervous, not because I didn't love them, but rather because I hadn't taken precautions to keep myself safe. Talking to my relatives required bravery. It was one of honesty rather than blame. I described my predicament. I explained what I could and couldn't do. They understood, which surprised me. They actually appreciated me more for establishing those limits. One of life's wonderful aspects is helping others. However, we must keep in mind that our resources are finite when we retire. Pouring from an empty cup is not possible, and by silently sacrificing our own well-being out of pride or shame, we do no one any favors. I now give in a different way. I provide presence, time, and attention. I assist as much as I can. Above all, I prioritize taking care of myself so that I may continue to support the people I care about without fear or bitterness. Fear of losing out on life's adventures is number 8. During retirement, there is a subtle pressure that creeps in. Though we don't discuss it much, we sense it. It is the idea that life is fleeting and that if we don't make the most of it now, we might not have another chance. This hurry may result in unanticipated expenditures. I experienced that following a cruise with some pals. They returned radiant, sharing tales of endless buffets and sunrises at sea. I listened and grinned, yet something stirred inside of me. Maybe I should go too, I thought to myself. Perhaps I'm missing something. Before long, I was examining pamphlets, defending the price, and assuring myself that I was worthy of it. The bill that followed was just as amazing as the trip itself. Afterwards, I saw that my choice had been motivated more by comparison than by genuine desire. Instead of choosing joy, I had allowed fear to make the decision. And by doing this, I had thrown off my budget for the ensuing months. While we idle around, it's easy to feel that everyone else is living better, doing more, and enjoying life. In actuality, though, nobody displays the tension that exists behind the scenes. And nobody can tell you what joy is. Every time I felt the want to spend money, I began asking myself one question. Do I really find value in this experience, or am I just striving to keep up? I was saved multiple times by that question. Smaller things now bring me joy. A stroll at dusk, a peaceful picnic, a phone conversation with an old friend. I do travel, but only when it suits me, and not because I feel excluded. Doing everything does not lead to tranquility in retirement. It results from picking the few things that are most important and letting go of the rest, guilt-free. 9. Not reviewing subscriptions and regular bills. I used to believe that setting up my bills was the end of it. All of these services, phone, internet, TV, and insurance, run in the background on autopay. It was practical, even accountable. However, those insignificant monthly expenses eventually turned into a silent leak in my finances. I stopped checking them, not because they were incorrect. I continued to pay for services that I had stopped using. Despite having a premium TV package, I primarily watched basic stations. I hadn't used either of my 2 streaming subscriptions in months. More data than I ever required was included in my phone contract. I hadn't compared rates for my insurance in years. Before I eventually sat down and inspected queue by queue, everything was just set. It served as a warning. I had completely forgotten about several subscriptions. Tiny monthly fees of $8 or $10 that, until I realized how many there were, did not seem worth canceling. They were all costing me hundreds of dollars annually for what I disregarded rather than what I appreciated. I created a list as a result. Every automatic payment, every recurring fee. Do I really use this? Does it still serve me? I asked myself, and if the answer was no, I canceled it. I paused it to check if I missed it if it was. I didn't most of the time. I also gave my service providers a call. I inquired about elder discounts, loyalty programs, and more reasonably priced plans. It was worth the patience in a few hours. Yes, I saved money, but more significantly, I felt in charge once more. It's simple to forget about recurring bills. They are harmful because of this. They are silent, reliable, and frequently undetectable. However, you may discover that you are paying for items that no longer match your life if you take the time to check, even once or twice a year. In this case, letting them go can seem like a breath of fresh air. 10. Not having the will or self-assurance to actively manage funds. During one period of my retirement, I experienced both physical and emotional exhaustion. I was intimidated by the thought of sitting down to go over statements, budgets, or invoices. I'll do it next week, I promised myself. However, the following week continued to get farther away. I was aware that I needed to examine my accounts, monitor my expenditures, and make any necessary corrections. However, on other days, I just lacked the enthusiasm, and on other days, I felt uncertain. What would happen if I erred? What would happen if I didn't grasp something? This aspect of aging is rarely discussed. The point at when wisdom remains strong but confidence begins to wane. I wasn't perplexed. I was simply exhausted. Little things started to slide because I was no longer paying close attention. I was unaware that my subscription had been renewed. 2 payments were made on a bill. I overlooked a deadline, therefore a late fee appeared. It was not dramatic, but it was stressful. Additionally, stress seems heavier now that I'm retired. I eventually came to the realization that I had to take action, not by myself, but with assistance. I made contact with a trusted person. It was my daughter for me. I allowed her to assist me in painting a sharper picture, but I did not give her complete power. Every month we got together to go over everything. She demonstrated how to track my spending using a basic app. She set up reminders and assisted me in organizing my documents. Giving up independence was not the point. It was about creating new processes that took into account my current stage of life. I also allowed myself to work at my own speed. I didn't have to be flawless. All I had to do was be there. The fear gradually subsided. Confidence reappeared when the turmoil subsided. Enough to feel steady again, but not all at once. Retirement money management doesn't have to be difficult, but it does need to be deliberate. Asking for assistance is not a sign of weakness if you ever feel too exhausted or uncertain to handle things on your own. It's knowledge. The first step to freedom is awareness. We don't splurge because we're careless, because life is full of habits, feelings, and little choices that subtly add up. We do it. It is simple to assume that we are spending lightly in retirement, particularly if we are not pursuing luxury. However, the reality is that excessive spending frequently goes unnoticed. It is in the habits we inherited from our time at work. It's in the little indulgences we don't monitor. It can be found in the silent subscriptions, the overlooked payments, and the sentimental purchases we make when we are missing someone or something. Here is the good news, though. We have the ability to change once we become conscious. You don't have to completely change your life. You don't have to feel bad. One step is all that is required. Pay attention. Softly and carefully examining where your money's going. Questioning whether it still accurately captures your identity and core values. Now, everything changed when I began focusing on purpose rather than just money. I started cutting back on my spending without feeling deprived. With the things I choose to hold on to, I felt more content, in control, and at peace. I want to say something if you're watching this and wondering if any of it relates to you. It's not too late, and you're not alone. Retirement is not a time to cling to the past. It is about finding new liberation, long-lasting, quiet independence. I appreciate you being here with me. I hope you will share this with someone you care about if it resonated with you, because sometimes the slightest realization leads to the most significant transformation.